David's hands shook as he stared at his father's grave. Red paint covered the headstone. Flowers lay crushed in the dirt. A torn American flag lay forgotten. Someone had destroyed the only sacred place he had left. The graffiti read, "No decorations allowed, HOA rules." His heart shattered completely. Before watching full story, comment below from where are you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. David pulled his old truck into the cemetery parking lot, just like he had every Sunday for the past 2 years. The morning sun cast long shadows between the headstones, and a gentle breeze rustled the oak trees that had watched over this peaceful place for decades. He carried a small bouquet of yellow roses, his father's favorite flowers, and walked the familiar path to the grave. His father, Robert Martinez, had been gone for 2 years now. Cancer had taken him slowly, but even in those final months, his father had remained strong and kind. "Take care of yourself, son," were among his last words. "And remember, I'll always be proud of you." David was 28 now, working as a mechanic in town. He wasn't married, didn't have much family left except for an aunt who lived 3 states away. These Sunday visits to his father's grave were the most important part of his week. He would sit on the small bench he had placed there, tell his father about work, about the weather, about his hopes and fears. It was the one place where he still felt connected to the man who had raised him alone after his mother died when David was just 10. As he rounded the corner near the old elm tree, David stopped walking. His heart began to race. Something was wrong. Where his father's grave should have been neat and peaceful, there was chaos. The small American flag David had placed there was torn and thrown aside. The flowers he had brought last week were scattered and crushed. Worst of all, someone had spray-painted ugly words across his father's headstone in bright red paint. "No decorations allowed," the graffiti read. "HOA rules." David dropped to his knees beside the grave. His hands shook as he tried to gather the scattered flowers. The yellow roses in his hand fell forgotten as he stared at the desecrated headstone. This was more than vandalism. This was an attack on everything sacred he had left. "Dad," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I should have protected this place." The cemetery was part of an old neighborhood that had recently been taken over by a homeowners association. The HOA had been making changes, posting new rules, and generally making life difficult for everyone. But David never imagined they would touch the cemetery. This was sacred ground, a place where families came to remember their loved ones. David carefully cleaned what he could from the headstone, but the red paint had stained the gray granite. He would need special cleaners, maybe even professional help. As he worked, anger began to replace his initial shock and sadness. Someone had done this deliberately. Someone had looked at his father's grave and decided to destroy it. He stood up, still holding the torn flag, and looked around the cemetery. Other graves nearby seemed untouched. Only his father's grave had been targeted. This felt personal. Walking back to his truck, David's mind raced. HOA rules in a public cemetery? That didn't make sense. The cemetery had been here for over 100 years, long before any homeowners association existed. He decided to find out who was responsible. At the cemetery office, Mrs. Henderson, the elderly groundskeeper, was watering flowers near the entrance. She had worked here for 15 years and knew every family, every story. "Mrs. Henderson," David called out. "Did you see what happened to my father's grave?" She looked up, her face immediately showing concern. "Oh, David. I'm so sorry, honey. I found it like that this morning when I came to work." "Do you know who did this?" "The paint mentions HOA rules." Mrs. Henderson glanced around nervously, then motioned for David to follow her into the small office building. Once inside, she closed the door and spoke quietly. "There's been trouble with Karen Westfield," she said. "She's the new HOA president for Maple Grove neighborhood. The cemetery sits right at the edge of their community, and she's been complaining about it for months." David had never heard of Karen Westfield, but the name was now burned into his memory. "What kind of complaints?" "She says the cemetery brings down property values. She's been pressuring the city to move it or at least enforce stricter rules about decorations. Last week, she came here with some official-looking papers, claiming she had authority to remove what she called excessive decorations." "A flag and some flowers are excessive?" Mrs. Henderson shook her head sadly. "I told her she had no authority here, but she got very angry. She said she would handle it herself if no one else would enforce proper standards." David felt his anger growing, but he tried to stay calm. "Do you have her address?" "David, honey, I understand you're upset, but maybe you should call the police first. What she did was vandalism." "I will call the police. But first, I want to talk to this Karen Westfield myself. Mrs. Henderson wrote down an address on a piece of paper. Please be careful, David. She's difficult. David thanked Mrs. Henderson and drove to Maple Grove, a newer neighborhood with large houses and perfectly manicured lawns. Every yard looked exactly the same grass, the same mailboxes, the same small trees planted at precise intervals. It felt cold and artificial compared to the older parts of town where David lived. Karen Westfield's house was the largest on the street, with a circular driveway and an elaborate garden. A sign in the yard read Karen Westfield, HOA President. David parked on the street and walked to the front door. The woman who answered was in her 50s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and expensive clothes. She looked David up and down with obvious disapproval, taking in his work clothes and the paint stains on his hands from trying to clean his father's headstone. Yes, she said coldly. Are you Karen Westfield? I am. And you are on private property. What do you want? David took a deep breath, trying to control his emotions. My name is David Martinez. You vandalized my father's grave this morning. Karen's expression didn't change. I have no idea what you're talking about. Red spray paint. No decorations allowed. HOA rules. Does that sound familiar? For a moment, something flickered in Karen's eyes, maybe guilt, maybe fear. But then her face hardened again. That cemetery is an eyesore that damages our property values. If someone finally took action to clean it up, they did this community a service. David couldn't believe what he was hearing. That's my father's grave. He's been dead for 2 years. The flag and flowers were the only way I had to honor his memory. Your personal feelings don't matter when property values are at stake, Karen said. This is a high-end neighborhood, and we have standards to maintain. You had no right. I have every right to protect my investment and my community, Karen interrupted. If you can't follow basic rules about public spaces, maybe you should find somewhere else to visit. The cruelty in her voice was stunning. David realized that arguing with her was pointless. This woman had no empathy, no understanding of what she had done. She saw his grief as nothing more than an inconvenience to her property values. This isn't over, David said quietly. Karen smiled coldly. Yes, it is. Good day. She closed the door in his face. David sat in his truck for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. This woman had destroyed the most sacred place in his life and showed no remorse. She was proud of what she had done. He had never encountered such heartless cruelty. But David wasn't just angry anymore. He was determined. If Karen Westfield thought she could destroy his father's memory and face no consequences, she was very wrong. His first stop was the police station. Officer Martinez, no relation despite the shared last name, listened to David's story and agreed to file a vandalism report. However, he explained that without witnesses or video evidence, it would be difficult to prove Karen was responsible, even though her motivation was clear. But we'll investigate, Officer Martinez promised. And if we find evidence, we'll press charges. Next, David went to the city hall. The clerk in the records department confirmed that the cemetery was public property and that no homeowners association had any authority over it. Karen's official papers were meaningless. She's been here several times, the clerk said. Very demanding, very rude. She seems to think being HOA president gives her some kind of special authority over city property. Armed with this information, David began to form a plan. If Karen Westfield wanted to play power games, he would show her what real community power looked like. That evening, David created a social media post with pictures of his father's vandalized grave. He wrote, "This is what happened to my father's grave today. Robert Martinez served our country in Vietnam and worked as a teacher in our community for 30 years. He died of cancer 2 years ago, and his grave is the only place I have left to honor his memory. This morning, someone spray painted it and destroyed the flowers and flag I placed there. The vandal claimed it was for HOA rules and property values. My father deserves better. Our community deserves better." David shared the post in every local Facebook group, sent it to the town newspaper, and asked his friends to share it. Within hours, the post had been shared hundreds of times. The comments were filled with outrage and support. "This is disgusting," wrote Maria Santos. "Who would do such a thing?" "I knew Robert Martinez," commented Tom Williams. "He taught my kids. He was a good man who deserved respect, especially in death." "The HOA has gone too far this time," added Jennifer Clark. "Something needs to be done." By the next morning, the story had spread throughout the town. The local newspaper called David for an interview, and by noon, A reporter was at the cemetery taking pictures and talking to Mrs. Henderson. The newspaper article came out the next day with the headline, "Local Veterans Grave Vandalized Over HOA Complaints." The article included quotes from community members who remembered David's father, details about Karen's complaints to the city, and confirmation that the HOA had no legal authority over the cemetery. The response was immediate and overwhelming. People began showing up at the cemetery to see the damage for themselves. Many left flowers at Robert Martinez's grave. Veterans groups expressed outrage. Church leaders called for community action. By Thursday, there was a crowd of people at Karen Westfield's house. They weren't angry or violent, but they were persistent. They held signs reading "Respect Our Veterans" and "Shame on HOA Bullies." Local news crews arrived to cover the story. David watched from across the street as Karen's perfect world began to crumble. Neighbors who had once feared her HOA authority now openly criticized her actions. Several homeowners announced they were leaving the HOA. Others called for her resignation. Karen finally emerged from her house, clearly flustered and angry. She tried to dismiss the crowd, but reporters pushed forward with questions. "Mrs. Westfield, did you vandalize Robert Martinez's grave?" "I have no comment." "Do you think veterans deserve respect in death?" "I said no comment." "Are you sorry for what happened?" Karen's composure finally cracked. "I was protecting property values. That cemetery is an eyesore that hurts everyone's investment. If people can't understand basic economics, that's not my problem." The crowd reacted with anger and disgust. Someone shouted, "He was a veteran." Another voice called out, "You should be ashamed." Karen tried to retreat back into her house, but the damage was done. Her words had been recorded by multiple news crews and would be broadcast throughout the region. Over the weekend, the story went viral on social media. Karen Westfield became the face of HOA overreach and cruelty. People from across the country shared the story, and many sent flowers and donations to help restore Robert Martinez's grave. A local monument company volunteered to clean and repair the headstone for free. The VFW Post adopted the grave and promised to maintain it permanently. The city council passed a resolution honoring Robert Martinez and condemning vandalism in the cemetery. Meanwhile, Karen's life was falling apart. Her real estate business was losing clients. The HOA board voted to remove her as president. Several neighbors put their houses up for sale rather than live near her. She received hundreds of angry messages on social media. On Sunday morning, exactly 1 week after the vandalism, David returned to his father's grave. The headstone had been cleaned and now looked better than ever. Dozens of flower arrangements surrounded it, along with small American flags and notes from strangers expressing support. David placed his weekly bouquet of yellow roses among the other flowers and sat on his bench. For the first time in a week he felt peace. "Dad," he said quietly, "I think you would be proud. Our community came together to protect your memory. Good people still exist and they're stronger than the cruel ones." As David sat there, he heard footsteps on the gravel path behind him. He turned to see a figure approaching slowly. It was Karen Westfield. She looked terrible. Her usually perfect hair was uncombed, and she wore simple clothes instead of her expensive outfits. Her eyes were red from crying. David stood up, unsure what to expect. Was she here to cause more trouble? To threaten him? To offer some weak excuse? Karen stopped about 10 feet away from the grave. For a long moment, she just stared at the headstone and the surrounding flowers. "I'm sorry," she whispered. David didn't respond. He waited. "I didn't know," Karen continued, her voice shaking. "I mean, I knew it was someone's grave, but I didn't know him. I didn't know he was a veteran, a teacher. I didn't know about you, about what this place meant." Tears began streaming down her face. "I thought I was protecting my neighborhood, my investment. I thought I was doing the right thing." Karen took a few steps closer to the grave, then suddenly fell to her knees. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I'm sorry to your father, I'm sorry to you, I'm sorry to everyone. I don't know what's wrong with me. I don't know how I became this person." David watched as this woman who had seemed so powerful and cruel just a week ago completely broke down. All her arrogance was gone, replaced by genuine remorse and shame. "I've lost everything," Karen continued through her tears. "My business, my position, my friends. But I deserve it. What I did was unforgivable." For several minutes they stayed like that. David standing beside his father's grave, Karen kneeling nearby, crying. Finally David spoke. "You're right. What you did was unforgivable. You took the most sacred thing in my life and destroyed it for money. You showed no empathy, no kindness, No basic human decency. Karen nodded, still crying. But, David continued, my father taught me that everyone deserves a chance to make things right. He believed people could change, could become better than their worst moments. David looked down at Karen, still kneeling in the dirt beside his father's grave. If you really want forgiveness, you have to earn it. Not from me, I'm not ready for that yet. But from this community. From the people you've hurt with your cruelty. Karen looked up at him with desperate eyes. How can I possibly make this right? Start by really changing, David said. Not just because you got caught and faced consequences, but because you understand why what you did was wrong. Learn about the people in this community instead of seeing them as obstacles to your property values. Volunteer. Help others. Show through your actions that you've become a better person. David picked up his truck keys. My father is at peace now. This grave is protected and the community has shown what really matters. Whether you find peace depends on what you do from here. As David walked away, he could hear Karen still crying beside the grave. He didn't know if she would actually change, if her remorse was genuine or just self-pity. But he had said what needed to be said. Over the following months, David heard occasional updates about Karen Westfield. She had indeed lost her real estate business and moved to a smaller house across town. Some people said she was volunteering at the Veterans Center. Others mentioned seeing her doing community service work. David didn't seek her out and she didn't contact him. The community had moved on, and Robert Martinez's grave remained a peaceful place where David could honor his father's memory. A year later, on the 3rd anniversary of his father's death, David found a small, simple bouquet of yellow roses placed beside his own flowers at the grave. There was no note, no name, but somehow he knew who had left them. Perhaps forgiveness wasn't something that happened all at once. Perhaps it was something that grew slowly, like flowers returning after a harsh winter. David wasn't ready to forgive completely, might never be. But seeing those anonymous yellow roses, he felt something shift in his heart. His father had always believed in second chances, in the possibility of redemption. Maybe David thought that was the greatest way to honor his memory, not through anger or revenge, but through the hope that even the cruelest people could find their way back to humanity. The yellow roses beside his father's grave seemed to glow in the morning sunlight, a small sign that love and memory were stronger than hate, that communities could protect what mattered most, and that sacred ground would always be sacred, no matter who tried to destroy it. David sat on his bench, surrounded by flowers from friends and strangers alike, and felt his father's presence strongly. This was still their place, still their time together. Nothing could change that, and nothing ever would. The sacred ground remained sacred, watched over by a community that understood what really mattered, protected by love that death could not diminish.